This is the Open University.
Back in Berlin, after essentially moving to Paris. I mean, I live a lot of the time in Paris with my girlfriend. I keep my flat in Berlin though because I need a recording studio. I need a place to retreat occasionally to get my head together. But also I've always been bipolar in the geographical sense of having two bases. I think that transition is very educational. And the transition this time happened via Strasbourg, which is the sort of city that perches on the border between Germany and France. I went first to Strasbourg, stayed over, because I really like Strasbourg. It's a bicycle-oriented city, a tram-oriented city. And unfortunately, my favourite second-hand clothes shop, which is called Friep and Roll, has closed down, or rather moved out to a little village, which is totally inaccessible, somewhere way outside of Strasbourg, which you need a car to get to. My plan was to take the red regional trains all the way across Germany back to Berlin, because there's this amazing offer just now, €9 per month. You get a travel pass, which is valid across the whole of Germany for every form of public transport, city transport, and also the regional trains. It was going to take 11 and a half hours, though, when I finally charted my course on these regional trains, from hopping from one little city to another. And I got a bit of a headache the first day because I took a train up from Strasbourg, from Kehl rather, which is the German side of Strasbourg, up along the Rhine to Karlsruhe. And the trains were incredibly hot, incredibly crowded, and a lot of boisterous teenagers sort of screaming and shouting, people with bicycles, and just a nightmare. I thought I was going to expire. So I dragged my suitcase to a hotel in Karlsruhe, and the next day I just I paid for a nice train. You know, it's great to have free things, but not if you have to go through hell for them. So my first day back in Berlin was a Sunday, and that in itself is a cultural difference between France and Germany, because Sundays are hellishly quiet. From my point of view, I don't like there to be any such thing as a public holiday or even a religious, especially a religious holiday. I'm used to Japan, where even on Christmas Day everything's sort of operating as normal, and you can ignore the fact that there's this kind of sculpted, prearranged kind of thing where you're supposed to treat some days as different from others according to somebody's schedule, somebody's idea of keeping one day special. Screw that, you know. All days are special for me. But on Sundays, the one benefit of this is that there are some really good markets on Sundays in Germany to make up for the shops being shut. So I went to my favourite now Köln Flohmarkt, which is the Maybachhofer gentrification market, I suppose you could call it, where people are selling their clothes and their possessions as they're about to leave Berlin. That's what I did back in 2010 when I moved to Osaka. But also there are kind of old cameras and old spectacle frames and clothes and records and things like that. So it's kind of pre-selected to appeal to people like me. Actually, one of the bad things I discovered this time is that a wine bar opened directly below my flat, which is full of chattering, wine-drinking, parachuted people. I tend to categorize Berlin into the parachuted and the zombie. The parachuted folks are kind of young, you know, startuppers or aspiring creative class people, usually English-speaking or international, and therefore forced to speak English as the lingua franca. And on the one hand, there are those privileged people who are usually the customers of new cafes and things. And on the other hand, there are the people who shuffle by and ask them for money, any spare coins, who are a precarian, extremely precarian class of what I call zombies, because they're impaired often by drug taking, by alcoholism, by physical disability, by homelessness, very impaired and often playing up their impairedness for dramatic effect. And I saw somebody, I think scoliosis of the spine on a train yesterday, just shuffling up through the S-Bahn, trying to get money from people. You do see more and more of these zombies. You see a really disadvantaged class at the same time as the rise of these privileged, parachuted people who are at the art school. That was the next place I went to, actually, after the Flohmarkt, was the Universität der Kunst, which had its Rundgang. That's the round going, or the walkabout, where you can look at the graduates, what they've been up to, what they've been making. And I saw a lot of embroidered kind of pseudo folk art this time. And I don't know, other things, some sort of direct sloganeering protests directed to the director of the art school. So there's sort of institutional critique going on within the art school. And a lot of, painting, a lot of mediocre first year work, architecture upstairs on the fourth floor, sculpture through the back, some work which looked ready to be shown in galleries, and other work which very much didn't. But I love the fact, I love art school degree shows for that mixture of talents and levels and abilities and styles and concerns. And there was also fashion and design and stuff in different buildings. I didn't see all of it because it's spread out over like 5 or 6 different buildings. What really struck me this time, though, was the security presence, which I'd never seen before at any art school degree show. There was a huge army of black-shirted private security goons sitting around and, chatting, and with loud radios, with handcuffs dangling from their belts. I just tried to visualize who they'd be arresting. You had to queue to get into the building, and I was asked in a kind of semi-jokey way, do you have any guns or drugs or knives in your bag? And I had to show my bag and show that I didn't have any of those. And they waved me in, but I just wonder what crimes they're anticipating, or the college is anticipating. Was it simply the fact that it's some video recorders or some laptops, projectors and things were being used and had been disappearing in previous degree shows, or was there some kind of anxiety about returning to in-person visits because they've had some virtual rundgangs in the COVID years, the last couple of years? There haven't been these walkthroughs, walk-rounds. Very different atmosphere from the Paris art degree shows, where there was no security that I could see, apart from possibly a couple of, the college's own security people at the door, at the gate. But it reminds me of Pasolini's poem about the uprisings in Rome, where the Pasolini sided against the leftist students and with the police, the young police recruits, and saying that they were the true proletarians and the students were privileged and bourgeois. A very sort of controversial position and famous position of Pasolini. So there was this sense of a working class presence of white, indigenous and indifferent security guards chatting their own concerns, and being noisier often. This is something that really infuriates me sometimes when you go to a museum and the walkie-talkies of these security people are noisier than the conversation in the room. So that line in T.S. Eliot's proof rock about in the room, the women come and go talking of Michelangelo, you don't really get that sense of there being a sophisticated conversation about the art, or because there's sophisticated conversation about security or unsophisticated conversation about security going on very loudly. And if it's not security, it's just these guys hanging out, being bored, being indifferent to what's around them. That indifference seeps into each room like a kind of dark shirted presence, and it seems to be saying, we are here as the guarantee of your liberty. It's a tough world out there. There are organized criminals who come in and will steal projectors and things. There are, dubious people of all sorts who we are keeping out so that you can have your chatter and your kind of, you can fund your children to come here as a kind of finishing school. Your lives are dependent on this security apparatus. So it sort of disturbs me somehow to see that so clearly kind of spelled out. There is this increasing number, and I see it in the city in general, not so much Berlin as any modern city. There are a lot of delivery cyclists and motorcyclists and people who are very impatiently, the nice areas of the city have been pedestrianized and assigned to liberty, a lot of deck chairs and kind of public entertainments and things like that. But through this kind of paradise of leisure and of desublimation are going these very overworked and stressed delivery people with big insulated bags, food bags on the back of their scooters or their bicycles or their motorbikes. And security is another kind of tribe, security everywhere, guaranteeing the, very visibly guaranteeing the freedom of the people relaxing. Berlin is a very relaxed city. It's very hedonistic in the ways that possibly Herbert Marcuse discusses in One Dimensional Man, this term repressive desublimation, which kind of goes along, it's a more Freudian take on repressive tolerance. Marcuse's idea of repressive tolerance is that there's a kind of sham democracy going on where the state appears to tolerate, appears to be guided by the people in democratic forms. You can vote for the leaders rather than simply being led by the leaders. But it's a kind of illusory, according to Marcuse, it's kind of illusory choice or series of choices in which you're simply ticking things which are going to happen anyway. Could you see any space between the Tory candidates at both backing Brexit, the Labour Party's also backing Brexit? There's very little actual oxygen in the choices. But so repressive desublimation is a much more cultural and complex idea that Marcuse has about how when we're asked to enjoy ourselves, it's really a way to reconcile us to the existing order, and that traditional art, high art, this sort of relates a bit to what I was saying about ineffable cohort recently. I haven't really expanded that idea properly, but the ineffable cohort was a kind of sublimated, in other words, mediated and a slightly difficult cultural world, which was liberating in a subtle way, because it required a bit of effort. It required a certain belief in something which was different from the reality principle. This is something Marcuse talks about in One Dimensional Man, the reality principle and the pleasure principle, which are terms from Freud. The reality principle is what we know. And I was talking, when I was talking about the ineffable cohort, I was talking about how algorithms and data about people's tastes and preferences make it impossible for us to kind of propose things which go above the confirmation of existing reality. That you wouldn't commission The Ascent of Man by Jacob Bronowski now because you know exactly how few people would be watching it. Or you probably wouldn't commission Civilization by Kenneth Clark either. These sort of blockbuster television series of the Reithian age of the BBC, where you're trying to improve people and give people a glimpse of other worlds, mediate traditional aristocratic art forms to people who are not aristocrats in the present but might still benefit from the otherness of those forms. That's kind of disappeared, and we all just click in a kind of lazy way from video, or we don't even click, we just get algorithmically curated streams of pet videos and sexy girls and whatever stuff appeals to us on a most basic and immediate level. Pet, cute things, and we've lost the pleasure of the enchanted kind of world. And some of the images you're seeing in this video on the side here are from a documentary about Maeterlinck, the Belgian symbolist, poet and children's author and playwright who won the Nobel Prize, actually, for Belgium, for Belgium, as if it was an Olympic medal. Maeterlinck really struck me as a child for the weirdness of his imagery, a sort of medieval romantic imagery, surreal imagery, I refer to Maeterlinck in one of my songs, the electrosexual sewing machine, which is sort of in the chorus, it recapitulates the plot of The Blind, which is a sort of almost Beckettian play by Maeterlinck about some blind people in a forest who have lost touch with their guide, a bit waiting for Godot. They're sort of discussing amongst themselves what they'll do when their guide returns, if their guide returns. So Maeterlinck, he seems to exemplify what Marcuse is talking about when he talks about repressive desublimation, which is that the alienated, we are alienated in a Marxist sense from the contemporary reality, the reality principle of production and sexual reproduction, as well as reproduction of values and production of the physical things mankind needs to exist, being alienating inherently under our current system. And the art provides a kind of emergency exit or another way of seeing things, which should not be related either directly to your sexual drives or your sort of, hardwired interest in cute things, or, the things which TikTok videos play on and learn to play on in each individual user of TikTok. And all social media are aspiring to basically be a stream of TikTok-like short videos which look at like advertising but are actually tailored to your particular interests by ruthless algorithms. These are depriving us of the freedoms of a sublimated and mediated and above all alienating in a positive sense, because they're the negation of the negation. They're alienating us from something itself alienated, which is the normality, the mainstream of our society. All the problems, like I was saying recently in these videos, the problems we face are not the problems of, evil individuals who are trying to manipulate us. They are systematic problems, and they're all tied up with absolutely normal things which we don't question or don't question enough, which is things like, should we have a baby? Should we drive a car? Should we vote? All the things which are meant to be freedoms, which have been proposed at certain times as freedoms and which actually are not. They are the continuation of a system of normality which is profoundly unjust and unsatisfying also. And I think the dissatisfactions of satisfaction are really something that Marcuse understood. I think that whole Frankfurt School really understood it very well, because it is the negation of the negation which they're seeking. It's an institutional negation. It's a systematic negation, which is normality, productive and reproductive negation, which needs to be negated by things like art and spirituality and solitude and all these unfashionable things. So I'm kind of thinking about those, thinking about the negation of the negation here in Berlin. Berlin, in some sense, negates Paris, but in other ways it's a continuation. And I, have quite a similar ghost-like presence. In Paris, I'm always with someone, with my girlfriend, but here in Berlin, I'm on my own, so I can have a more detached and possibly more cerebral take on things. That's a little update. I'm going to be on holiday quite soon in the south of France, in the countryside with my girlfriend's family, so that's going to be a totally different experience. And transition is interesting. So I think it's always nice to have another reality to transition to. That's all I'm going to say today. Goodbye.
Open University.
TV Club. Our next program this morning begins in 2 minutes.